heritage ministers in a week to be fired. So.
Mark, they're not trying to help you. You come here instead. They're not helping you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the transparency of the Liberal government in action right there. Yesterday, the Conservatives spent over 8.5 hours in committee and successfully stalled Bill C-9 until at least January of next year, while Carney's ministers fumbled their questions to reporters so badly that he forced Mark Miller to leave the scrum. Let's take a look.
Which groups are you going to be meeting with? You mentioned you were going to be meeting with faith groups. Who are you going to be meeting with, and what arguments are you going to be making to them?
First of all, we haven't established a list of the complete number of meetings. There's a number of faith leaders who've reached out who would like to have an opportunity to share their points of view. We were going to get through the House sitting and then determine specifically who we'll be meeting with, when we'll be meeting with them. To the second part of your question, I just don't want to frame this around the idea that there's going to be arguments, but sharing one another's perspectives. I've got a sincerely held view that the very real concerns that people have raised in the context of C-9 are addressed with the laws that are in place, to the extent that we can ensure that we're operating on a common perception of what in fact the proposed block amendment would potentially do, and communicate that we are going to ardently defend religious freedoms in this country. That's a fundamental part of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. When I look at the history of this provision that's the subject of the block amendment, this has been in place for many years, even before the protections of the Charter came into effect. To the extent we can demonstrate that we will resolutely defend religious freedoms in this country as we seek to advance a bill who, at its very core, is about protecting rights and protecting communities against hate, and communicating that, in fact, the initial motivation for this bill was based on the idea that communities of faith should be able to practice their faith freely in communities. Hopefully we can come to a common understanding of a shared outcome that we want to see, which is that everyone in this country should be free to practice the religion of their choice.
So if it's never been used, why do you think it's blown up so much? Why is it such a big political issue if it's never been used in a single case?
Well, the perception that I'm hearing from people who have sincerely held concerns is that they fear that there may be people that are seeking to target them. My perspective is that there are laws, the supreme law of this country, the Constitution, defends beyond a shadow of a doubt the idea of people to freely practice their religions. We will defend that ability in our communities, in our courts, and in our laws. Again, if we had proposals that were seeking to erode religious freedoms, that would be antithetical to the actual purpose of the bill that we're putting forward to combat hate in this country. So we're going to have meaningful conversations with a number of faith leaders, others who may express support or concerns, to understand whether we can actually move forward in a way that respects everyone's ability to practice their faith freely.
Okay, so a couple things there, eh? Number one, the amendment has already been voted on by the Liberal government in committee. And if you look at the whole agenda of the Justice Committee, it seemed like their intent was to actually get this through and get it done on Tuesday when they had that 8-hour meeting. They wanted to get through every single clause to be able to finish report stage at committee to send it back to the House. And who knows, maybe even vote on it this week to actually send it to the Senate. That's my guess is what they were hoping to do. So if you zero in on what Sean Fraser said, faith leaders around the country should be zeroing in on it as well, because he said, well, you know, I have a number of faith leaders that I'm going to be having meetings with and consult with. Consult on what? Because if everything went your way, this would already be out of the House. So what would you consult them on? Nothing. Because it would have been after the fact. And I have a feeling the only reason that you were going to be consulting with them is so you could say, well, we consulted with religious leaders. After the fact, you didn't consult with any of them prior to this amendment. And then he says, oh, well, you know, the Constitution and the Charter is going to protect people's religious freedom. Well, then what was the whole point of removing that amendment then? And the reporter even asked about it, right? The reporter says, well, if it hasn't been used, why do you need to remove it? And he doesn't answer the question, right? He just he skirts off and tries to answer something else. Well, well, there's concern from groups that it's going to be target. Well, considering that law enforcement doesn't really have a habit of arresting certain demographics of religious folks, let's just say that, and considering the fact that all these dozens of Christian churches have been burned across the country, there's virtually no media attention on that and no desire of the Liberal government to highlight that, no desire to call out that type of religious persecution. So yeah, pretty sure it's a genuine concern of some groups. So but this is something, folks. But the great thing is that as a result of the relentlessness of the Conservatives all this week, over 16 hours in committee, folks, of the Conservative team, and it's Larry Brock, it's Roman Baber, it's a whole roster of them, because they kept coming in and out and in and out. They were able to stall off C-9 until January. So that's a win as far as I'm concerned. It's a win for religious freedoms to put this off, and make sure that Canadians, at least over the holidays, can rest a little easier. But also, this is going to make those conversations with these faith leaders that much more difficult between Mark Fraser and them, because this bill has not yet left committee and it has not left the House of Commons yet. So this is going to make it that much more difficult, and I hope they give them what for.
Are you going to fire Marie Chapman from the Immigration Museum?
I found out about this report, which is alarming, 2 days ago. As you know, the ministers are not in the position of firing museum heads, but there is a governance process. Ms. Chapman's official term ended at the end of October, if I'm recalling properly, and has been extended provisionally for about 90 days. But what I do expect is the board to review this report seriously and take the appropriate action.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mark Miller. So if you may or may not know what this is referring to. So let's just bring this up. So this is all circling around a CEO at a museum, and the CEO has been essentially emotionally destroying all of her employees, to the point where she's calling her leadership team, well, let's just say it's a really nasty derogatory word, and it's reprehensible, her conduct in this. And this was a lady, full transparency, was appointed by Stephen Harper in 2011, Stephen Harper's government, and was reappointed in, I believe, 2016 by Justin Trudeau and his government. So she's been around for a while, and this is not a one-time incident, and she's just gone off. Sounds like the CBC leadership, to be honest, from what we heard from Travis Donner's lawyer. But he started getting these questions at the Scrum, and he started handling them very badly. And then something happened.
Ms. Chapman admitted in that report, when she responded to it, that she did call a senior leadership team sluts. She's facing mistreatment allegations over the span of a decade, to the point where some told the Integrity Commissioner they contemplated self-harm. What is your reaction to that, and should she be reappointed in that role?
Well, it's entirely unacceptable. And again, if any of these allegations are true, I would expect the board to do its job.
This is not the first case where national museums in recent years have been facing allegations, and people are telling us that they have accountability concerns. The Integrity Commissioner herself said that there are this damage or has a serious risk to the government's credibility and as well as the museums. What are you going to do about the accountability issues? And
Absolutely.
Is there a gap there?
Look, I think in terms of accountability, you have two processes. You have the ethics commissioner, which is not the first instance that people turn to, and is usually something that people turn to when things like these have occurred. There is a board that is elected and is expected to exercise a robust government's role on the CEO, and we would expect it to do it in this case. When you talk about museums and the role of the government in controlling museum heads or even content, it's a very, very slippery slope. So I do have my opinions. I think if anything in that report is indeed accurate, it's certainly grounds for the board to take action and to make sure that the CEO is
Can I
disconnected.
ask, just taking a look to next year, just for a year-end piece, do you have any objectives or goals? What are you expecting around here in 2025?
Or else I'll get in trouble. It's been a week, so I don't want to be late.
This is a GIC. Can you just clarify? This is a GIC appointment. I missed the beginning of what you said. This is a GIC. This is an accountability.
You're already getting me in trouble.
This is a GIC.
You don't want two heritage ministers in a week to be fired. So
you may be asking, what happened there? He just left. After that reporter tried to keep asking him about this scandal with this museum, and he just left, and he said, "Oh, you're getting me in trouble already, and you don't want two heritage ministers fired within the span of a week." Well, thankfully, a reporter, ironically, from the CBC, posted a different angle of this. Take a look.
You can come talk to
Mark, they're not trying to help you, Mark.
You come here instead.
They're not helping you.
Prime Minister Mark Carney and Dominic LeBlanc, one of his ministers, probably one of his inner circle, are screaming at Mark Miller to get out of the scrum. And if I'm hearing right, what I'm hearing is Dominic LeBlanc saying, they're not helping you. They're not helping you. And they're getting him out of asking these questions. Ladies and gentlemen, the transparency of the Liberal government in action right there. And even the reporters are saying, why don't you guys come out and answer some questions? That's literally your job. You're accountable to the Canadian public and supposed to be to the Canadian press gallery. But no, they're just laughing, having a great old good time. And a reporter is asking questions on a very serious issue. And Mark Miller makes it about him. Oh, well, you're getting me in trouble. Obviously, I'm not answering these questions very well. And my boss and his colleague are telling me I have to leave. Wow. Way to go, Mark Carney. Way to go, Liberal government, for that continued commitment to transparency.
I'm just asking about all these bills that you mentioned. A lot of them have not passed that. How are you calling this a productive session when you still have a number of bills that have not passed?
It's been an incredibly productive session. We've tabled major pieces of crime legislation to deal with things like extortion, child pornography, intimate partner violence. It's been a massively successful introduction of crime legislation. As I talked about our economic plan, that is moving forward. We've cut taxes for Canadians. We've made life more affordable. I think the country has moved a long way since the election.
So you would still call it successful even though legislation has not passed and reached Royal Senate?
I would add that we're hopefully going to pass our border bill today, C-12, which contains significant issues to deal with issues at the border and with immigration. So these are big changes, and I don't think anyone should discount them.
So at the beginning of the interaction, which we didn't bother showing, McKinnon says, "Oh, this has been a very productive session." And then the reporter says, "You haven't passed anything." "Well, we cut taxes for Canadians." Oh. I see. You mean you saved us about $1 a day? Woohoo! we made life more affordable. Never mind the fact that all the other things that we've done have increased the cost on Canadians. And as we learned, everyone's groceries for a family of 4 just went up by about $1,000 next year. Whoop-de-doo. And this is the hilarious thing about it. Well, we tabled all these bills. Yeah, lots of bills get tabled in government. But if you can't pass your bills, what's the point? And if you can't pass through your bills, what's wrong with them? And this is where the Conservatives, I think, are in a really good spot, because they stripped out the bad stuff of C-5, allowed that to get passed. They stripped out all the stuff on Anandis Angry's initial border bill. Remember all the garbage we covered about that? Now it's all watered down and it's not really going to do anything. But hooray, they're going to get a border bill passed, thanks to the Conservatives. So the only bills that are actually getting to the point where they can be passed have been appropriately gutted by the Conservatives to strip out all of the government overreach that is in every single one. So, hooray, Steve McKinnon. You can try and convince yourself that this was a productive session legislatively for the Liberal government, but you're not going to convince Canadians of that. And reporters ended up running into Sean Fraser one more time.
What do you make of, like, is there a world where the Justice Committee just goes to bail, just as the Conservatives have been wanting?
Look, I'm not going to be in a position to direct the workings of the committee. Right now, they're in clause by clause at the final stages of considering Bill C-9. My hope is that parties will understand that in a democracy, we get to make decisions collectively, and that every member of the committee has been elected to represent the voice of their constituents. And my hope is they're going to get through clause by clause, but that's something that committee members are going to be able to determine.
Will you be disappointed if it doesn't get through the clause by clause by the time the House rises?
Well, look, it's not my disappointment. It's communities who've been asking for protections to freely practice their religion, who are concerned about facing hate crimes across this country. My concern is for the people that, frankly, were in our minds when we were drafting this bill, who are demanding that we take action to combat hate crimes. So it's not my personal feelings that matter in this context. It's people who are living with the real consequences of rising hate. I would be disappointed for them, not for my own sake.
You're concerned about all these people who have been coming to you wanting to practice religion freely throughout Canada and not be subject to hate crimes. Yeah, so your new amendment basically said to everybody, well, you now, if you're practicing your religion, you are now subject to being prosecuted. Congratulations, Mr. Fraser. I don't think you accomplished what these initial consultations actually were talking about in the first place. That's the problem. And what people have been suggesting, and it's most likely why you didn't bring these people to committee, and the Justice Committee just kept canceling meetings, preventing these witnesses from showing up, is these witnesses were going to tell you, you don't need to change the law. What you need to do is change the culture of law enforcement so that there's actually some courage to enforce the law. You can't be afraid to make arrests just because somebody is waving a Palestinian flag. So it comes down to enforcing the laws that we have, because if you don't even use the laws that we have, what is the sense in making new laws? And the answer is there is no sense. So it's going to be fascinating to see what type of discussions happen around one of the most religious times of the year outside of Easter, at least in the Christian world. And those discussions around the table, discussions, when people go to church, when people go to mass, when people get together with their friends and family, what type of discussions are going to happen when people start talking about the fact that the Liberals are moving to criminalize religious beliefs by removing this religious defense? That's going to be the question. And Canadians are going to be noticing they're paying even more for food, even more for rent, and even more for everything. And as we said in our previous video, Canadians are starting to wake up and the polls are starting to slip. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see where things are when Parliament comes back in February.